Hello, this is a first look at the remote desktop protocol server inside the KDE Plasma Wayland session. This is a fresh installation of the Linux operating system KDE Linux. Let's try to open the RDP settings inside system settings. I search for RDP, says remote desktop. In here I enable the RDP server. This is not a human readable text, KCM_RDP. I'm going to enable my current user. The name of my current Linux user is actually administrator. Set as favorite the console application. Who am I? Administrator. Okay, so this should be it. I have enabled the remote desktop protocol server. I have allowed the local Linux user account administrator to log in using the system password, whatever that is, of the user administrator. And now let's connect from the host computer using the remote desktop client application RDP. This is my wiki page and mariusp.github.io. The RDP page. At the very end of the page, I have the instructions on how to use the remote desktop protocol client application FreeRDP. The host operating system is Ubuntu 26.04 and I'm using the X session of KDE Plasma X11. Let's open a terminal and prepare a command line. So the name of the executable is xFreeRDP. I can specify the IPv4 address. Ends with 46. Let's just try to connect like this. Just the name of the executable, xFreeRDP, and then the IPv4 address of the RDP server. Nothing else. Asks for the domain. Hopefully dot is enough. Asks for password. A self-signed certificate was generated on the RDP server, which is correct. I'm going to trust it. And then something strange happens because I'm not asked for the name of the user. So somewhere in here it should say that a name is required if I want to connect to the remote desktop protocol server. Okay, so that didn't work. Let's do specify the username like this with domain also. Password. Something happens. And then it says that the disconnection was initiated by the user logging off, which is a lie. Log off by user. Okay, so the RDP client doesn't really show what the error is. There is an error. I couldn't connect. But we'll look at the error on the remote desktop protocol server. For that, I'm going to actually enable the SSH server. on KDE Linux. The OpenSSH SSH server is installed by default in this Linux operating system, KDE Linux, but it's not enabled by default. At this point, we should be able to connect remotely. And the IPv4 address is this one. I'm connecting using OpenSSH because like this, I can copy paste text, and I can also resize the SSH connection terminal any way I want. Okay, we want to look at the journal, the newest boot, and descending by timestamp, which is the newest lines first. Okay, so we have lines from this minute. We're going to wait a bit until we get at the minute 6, so this is minute 5, and then we'll try to reconnect and see exactly the error. Okay, so we don't have any log lines inside KDE Linux at the minute 6, just at the minute 5, which means that probably the lines that we will have here will be related to the failure to connect using the remote desktop protocol server. Okay, so let's look at all of the lines from the minute 6. And it's just a very small number of lines. Let's put this in a text editor. And see what it says. So it says that there's a remote desktop protocol server running on KDE Linux. It identifies itself as KRDP server. This is probably the process name. This is probably the process ID. Let's actually check this. So ps aux grep RDP. So process ID 4046 and process executable name KRDP server. And we have errors related to PAM authentication and log name administrator, and says password check failed for user administrator. And then there's this executable Unix check password, which is part of PAM, which doesn't manage to check if the password that I provide via the remote desktop protocol client is actually the password of the current user. And we can also see that this remote desktop protocol server actually runs as the user administrator. So a process running as the user administrator cannot check if the provided password is correct for the current user. So I'm not exactly sure why such an error would be. Okay, next up, I have searched on Google and found that these types of errors might be either because Unix check password is not configured correctly, or PAM is not configured correctly, because the KRDP server doesn't run as the user root. Maybe one of these processes cannot read from /etc/shadow, and I am recommended to add a second time the user administrator, but this time I should specify the password. So I do that inside the KDE Plasma system settings, remote desktop. I press this plus add new button, administrator, and then provide a password. Save. Says that I want to restart this process, KRDP server. So restart server. And now we can see that the user administrator is allowed twice. First as a system user and then as another type of user. Let's see if the process ID of the process KRDP server has changed from 4064. And it did. It's now 4440. Let's try to connect. And this time we are successful. We can see the exact same desktop in two different places. In Vert Manager, inside the graphical console spice, and then inside the X3RDP client window. Exact same desktop, exact same pixels, exact same resolution, scaling, everything. So this is a very important first step. I can see inside the remote desktop protocol client the bits from the remote computer. The next one is, let's make sure that the mouse works correctly. So it does, which means that mouse input works correctly. Let's open a text editor and make sure that the mouse actually, or maybe a paint application. Make sure that the mouse is not off. And it's not because we have the cursor. Okay. So we have bits output, pixels output, and mouse input. We have keyboard input. Next up, we would want to have the ability to resize the desktop in some way, either by just resizing the FreeRDP window. That should change the resolution of KDE Plasma, or from system settings, we should be able to resize. So let's see that. I would want a resolution that's similar to the left half of the screen. So that would be half of 1080p. How do I find such a resolution? Unfortunately, the list of resolution is fixed. I cannot input the exact number of pixels that I want in here. So it says that the current resolution is 16 by 10, 1280 by 800, which is unexpected. There's 1080p, but I don't have enough screen real estate for this. And I'm going to have scroll bars, so something that's not as tall, so less than 1080 pixels in height. What about this one? Okay, why can't I use my mouse? Unfortunately, I can use my keyboard. Okay, and now mouse input stopped worked correctly. I cannot click because I don't know where the mouse is. Okay, so if I click on the first line, it clicks on the, if I click on the third line inside KWrite, it clicks inside the first line. So there's a delta, there's a difference between the place where I click and the place where the click gets registered. So if I click on the second line, it will press the new button. And if I click on this tab, it's going to actually save the document. Okay, and I'm not sure where the file save as dialog is. Now we also have a difference between the what's shown in the remote desktop protocol client versus what's shown in the virtual machine. So in the virtual machine, there's a file save as dialog on top of the text editor window, whereas in the FreeRDP window, I cannot see this dialog. Yet if I move inside the FreeRDP window, it's actually moving inside the KDE Linux window. So mouse input continues to semi-work, but I don't see all of the pixels. I don't see the save file dialog. I don't know how to refresh because I cannot click on the KDE Plasma Start menu button. Let's reconnect. Okay, I still don't see the file save as dialog. Let's dismiss this dialog from the virtualization software. Let's see if the mouse started working correctly. Yes, it did. So now the mouse works correctly. So if you want to resize the KDE Plasma, if you want to change the KDE Plasma resolution from the remote desktop protocol client, and you see that the mouse position starts to not be correct, you should reconnect using the remote desktop protocol client. Also important for an RDP connection is that the session is kept. So all of the apps that you have opened should remain open, should be in the exact same position, even if you disconnect using the RDP client and then reconnect. And even if the computer where the RDP client runs is restarted, for instance. So note to self, after I change the resolution, I should reconnect using the RDP client. This issue is not fixed though, so the file save as dialogs for Flatpak applications, which probably use the a Flatpak portal for KDE. Don't get shown, don't get probably captured by the remote desktop protocol server, and don't get shown in the RDP client. But the window is actually there. Okay, next up, I have disconnected and reconnected by closing the FreeRDP window 3 times and reopening it. And now I have 4 icons in the KDE Plasma system tray where it says remote control. KRDP is exercising remote control privileges. See what's on the screen, move the pointer and type keystrokes. If I click on this icon, it shows a end button, which I'm not sure what it does, but it does close the system tray icon. Okay, when I have closed the final system tray icon, the RDP connection has closed. I can close the RDP session in multiple ways. There's a KDE Plasma system tray icon for the RDP server, where you can, for instance, right-click and then quit. Or in system settings, search for RDP, and then, for instance, you can disable the RDP server. Or just close the RDP client, or you can log out, because if you're logged out, you cannot connect to the RDP server because there's no RDP process running. Yeah, something unexpected is happening right now. There might be a lingering connection to the Wayland compositor. I'm not exactly sure what's happening here. I'm going to close the FreeRDP client window. Okay, and now we get to the desktop manager. Okay. At this point, we can see that there's no RDP server, there's no KRDP server process. Again, this process has run as the user administrator as part of the KDE Plasma Interactive Graphical User Interface session. Okay, but once we log in, I'm not sure what's happening. Somehow this setting has been automatically disabled, which is strange. So a setting that the user has configured was undone just by logging out of the KDE Plasma desktop. Let's make sure that the server has started. It did. And now we might be able to connect if we get the approval from the portal. So this is the portal confirmation. So the server KRDP is asking to control the screen, so to provide mouse input and keyboard input, and to provide pixels output. See what's on the screen. Okay, so what we have here works. And now we also have this checkbox which says auto start on login, which I'm not sure what it means. If I log inside KDE Plasma as the user administrator, will the remote desktop protocol server start? Or if I just restart my computer and I'm inside the desktop manager and no user is connected in graphical user interface mode using KDE Plasma Wayland session. Let's actually test everything. I'm going to enable the auto start on login checkbox. And I'm actually going to restart the computer. Let's see if we can do that. Let's see if we can restart from the RDP server. Restart, and now. Sometimes when you're connected via RDP on some operating systems, you cannot restart them or shut that operating system down. Okay, so the computer virtual machine has restarted. Let's connect using SSH. Let's list the processes. I would guess that a process similar to KRDP server, or maybe something similar to a desktop manager, a login manager for the remote desktop protocol, is running. I'm not sure exactly as which user though. It certainly should not run as the user administrator because the user administrator is not logged in yet. Let's do the exact same thing. So no, I cannot find any process with RDP in name on the computer. So I'm connecting inside the virtual machine. And now I'm curious to see what the setting inside system settings says if the server is enabled. So the top right instant apply checkbox radio button. So this guy says enable RDP server, which is strange. Should say disabled or enabled or something. Okay. And let's make sure that the process was started automatically. So maybe this checkbox will start the remote desktop protocol server automatically when you log into KDE Plasma. But then I'm not sure why there are two different checkboxes for the exact same thing. So this is a temporary setting, and this is a setting that gets kept even if you restart your computer. I don't know. This should be just one checkbox. Yeah, there's that difference for system, the units and of type service, that you can enable a service, which means that if you restart the computer, the service will run, but then you can also enable it now. So you can start it, which is a different option. Yeah, but still, these two checkboxes do kind of the same thing, and their text is different, and they're in different places, so. And they don't have a hint. If I hover on top of it, I don't see exactly what it's doing by having a more text pop up. They should have some tip when I hover on top of these two checkboxes. Okay, so that means I'm going to be able to connect. Let's see if I close this window. I should be able to continue to work. Okay. Let's see if copy paste of text works. So I'm trying to copy from the remote desktop protocol server towards the client, and it did work. But then I'm not exactly sure how it worked. It might have worked correctly because I have a Vert Manager, or because I have the remote desktop protocol connection. Inside the default output from the remote desktop protocol client, it doesn't say anything related to clipboard and plain text. But yeah, it does work. Copy paste at least one direction of plain text. Let's see the other way around, from the RDP client towards the RDP server, and also works. So copy paste of text works, hopefully because of the RDP connection, not because of the virtualization software. Very important feature to have. This is a list of features that are important for me from the remote desktop protocol. I want copy paste of text to work, and it does work. I want the best speed possible, and from what I see, the speed is there. The virtual machine is running on the same computer, so there are no networking issues. The video is compressed using H.264, hopefully software encoding. So I can really feel the speed. Is there transparency? The pixels just look correct and move as fast as possible. Very important. So I have 2 features out of 3 that I actually require. The next one is to be able to change the resolution inside KDE Plasma, or to have the FreeRDP window change this automatically for me. Why? Because I want to have the web browser on my host computer, which is configured the way I want it. And I want it to use the right half of the screen, and the left half of the screen I want it to be used by the FreeRDP window, the remote desktop protocol connection. In here I run random, very temporary virtual machines, and there's no point in configuring a web browser correctly each time I create a new virtual machine. So I can actually ignore the web browser inside the virtual machine if I can only resize the FreeRDP connection to half of 1080p. So that resolution would be half of 1080p, so that's 960 width, and height would be 990 pixels. So the desired resolution that I want is with 960 and height I want 990. If I somehow can manage to tell KDE Plasma, hey, use this resolution from now on, then I'm happy. Previously, when I have used the KDE Plasma X11 session, I have not used the built-in remote desktop protocol server that exists in KDE Plasma, but I have used the dedicated remote desktop protocol server XRDP, Xorg XRDP, and that has these additional features where if I resize the RDP window, it will tell KDE Plasma to change its resolution. And this way I can use arbitrary resolutions inside KDE Plasma. And also, when I use XRDP, XOR XRDP, I don't need to use the virtualization software to log into the KDE Plasma session, because the remote desktop protocol server runs not as my Linux user account, so as the user root, and provides something similar to a desktop manager where I can provide the user and password and it will start KDE Plasma correctly and the X server. So that would be the fourth feature that I want. I want to be able to not start the KDE Plasma session from the virtualization software first and then connect via the remote desktop protocol client. First is copy paste, 2 is speed, third is arbitrary resolution inside KDE Plasma, fourth, don't force me to use the virtualization software to log in. So let's see if, let's just try our luck and see if the way we did it previously works. So we want to specify an initial height and width for the remote desktop protocol client. So width, let's just put the values that I want, which is 9.6 and this one 9.9. That was the resolution that I wanted, but then the RDP client has detected the correct resolution inside KDE Plasma and it has changed the initial resolution that I wanted with the only resolution that's possible, the actual resolution. Okay. The free RDP window is not resizable because we did not specify that we want to use the remote desktop protocol feature dynamic resolution. Let's actually try to use that too. Okay, now the FreeRDP client window is resizable, but if I resize the client either doesn't tell the RDP server, or the RDP server doesn't offer this feature, or the RDP server sees the request to change the KDE Plasma resolution and doesn't have that feature implemented, or maybe you cannot just set arbitrary width and height resolutions inside the KDE Plasma Wayland session. Hopefully, I am able to change the KDE Plasma Wayland session resolution using a command line tool. So there is this command line tool, kscreen -doctor. This is the help, so we probably want to use the command line parameter -o to see the available information. I'm not sure if this is allowed, but I'm totally testing it out. So I'm looking at the output of kscreen -doctor space -o. There's just one output and there are 26 modes. I'm trying to add the mode that I care about, which is width 960 and height 990. The syntax looks like this: kscreen -doctor and then space output and then the number, this, so .1, and then dot the method name, add custom mode, and then 960.990 dot, and then the refresh rate. So in this case, I want just the blend default one, which is 60. And you must multiply this thing with 1000, so 60,000, and then dot full. it didn't, the command line didn't show any error. And then when I run kscreen -doctor space -o again, this time instead of 26 modes, there are 27 modes, and the final one is the one that I have specified. The 60 Hertz thing is not that easy to specify, as you can see in here. There's all sorts of variations around the 60 Hertz. Exact 60 or a bit above or a bit below 60. And from the system settings display configuration in the resolution combo box, it's this one with a very strange aspect ratio, 32 by 33. Let's see if we can change to it and if we can change from the remote desktop protocol client. So apply and then tab a number of times. How do we do that? No! I'm not sure where the mouse is. Okay, so I needed to switch tasks because I cannot use my mouse. And now I'm going to reconnect. Okay, and now my mouse has been calibrated and it works correctly. So reminder, when you change the KDE Plasma Wayland session resolution and you're connected via RDP, you somehow need to press the apply changes button, keep changes, but then you immediately need to reconnect from the remote desktop protocol client. So in order to press that button, because you don't have the mouse, moreover, you have a mouse, but it clicks in a very different place that you think, so it's not calibrated. You should totally ignore the mouse. You should not touch the mouse because otherwise you might, for instance, change the focused application. But you can use the keyboard. Where is it? I pressed the Alt-Tab key. I got to the system settings window, and then that has focused correctly the modal dialog. And then I have pressed the Tab key to place the focus, the cursor on the button to keep the settings, and then you can press either Enter or Space probably. Okay, so I definitely am impressed. The third feature that I wanted actually does work correctly right now. Yeah, you need a number of workarounds, but it's available right now. Let me actually write down the features that I want and that work correctly. So RDP features. So one, I want copy paste of text. There's multiple clipboards. There's the primary selection clipboard. There's the clipboard. I don't want the primary selection. It's okay if you just use the clipboard. Then there's the X11 clipboard, the Wayland clipboard. Somehow make them both work because I use them both. And then you can copy paste plain text, but you can copy paste, I know, HTML text or RTF text or images, etc. I only care mostly of plain text. There's way more advanced features. There's copy-paste of actual files. There's the RDP feature where you can share the home directory of the RDP client inside the RDP server. There's additional sharing. You can share your actual hardware printer on the RDP client, or a fingerprint scanner, or a USB stick, etc., etc. There's multiple features in the remote desktop protocol. I don't require all of them. I require 4, but kind of in this order. And then I want performance, and performance works okay because of H.264, and copy paste of text sometimes works. If it doesn't work, I'm going to probably reconnect the remote desktop protocol client. And then I want to be able to change KDE Plasma resolution. And then that can be done really simple and in a fast way using 2 invocations of kscreen doctor. Okay. And then the 4th feature that I want is to not use the virtualization software or any other software to log into KDE Plasma session. To start. Okay, so this feature, I'm going to guess it's not implemented yet. It was implemented in GNOME Shell. It works correctly there. So the entire feature set is available, which means, I know, Wayland protocols and portals. There is this antecedent implemented in the GNOME, therefore implementable in KDE Plasma. This requires command lines, which is fine by me. This works correctly, this works correctly. So very impressed with what I have found on my first interactions with the remote desktop protocol server in KDE Plasma Wayland session. The X11 session inside KDE Plasma will not be shipped in a number of months. And at that point, this will be probably my go-to solution to connect using the remote desktop protocol to various virtual machines running KDE Plasma and various Linux operating systems. So this is it. Thank you.